Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Ryan, and all of your listeners.
Great. Well, let's start with your background. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you first got into the new economy space?
Sure. Well, I started my career working in the consumer cooperative world and was looking to connect consumer co-ops with liberation movements that were happening. This is in the early 1980s in Latin America and Africa, and worked together with a couple other people in the co-op movement in New England and basically ran into a lot of walls. And so eventually we started our own company to do the things we couldn't do in the consumer cooperative movement. And that company became Equal Exchange, the fair trade coffee company that I guess now we can say coffee, tea, chocolate, olive oil, dried fruit, nuts, etc. And I did that for about 15 years and was looking to really do more innovation once at Equal Exchange. We kind of made it to kind of first level of success. It seemed like we were going to be around for a while and didn't find the same appetite I had amongst my co-owners at Equal Exchange. So I moved on and did a variety of consulting projects looking to address some of the weaknesses in fair trade around access to credit, access to business training in particular. And then I had the opportunity as a consultant to do a feasibility study and then a business plan to set up a joint venture fair trade banana company. And I ended up running the banana company for 3 years, back to consulting. All this time, post Equal Exchange, and really at the end of my Equal Exchange time, I was really looking for ways to push and nudge and support the fair trade movement to really go back to where I started around connecting with liberation movements and unpack power dynamics. So to have conversations about race, class, gender, sexual orientation, different lenses of power. Fair trade, what I found is that the more success we had as a movement, the more integrated we got into the marketplace, the less and less appetite there was to really have those important conversations and to locate ourselves, I would say, in a historical context. And so I tried as one person a variety of different projects and just pushing people and eventually realized that I wasn't finding a way in and that fair trade was getting further and further away from where I wanted to be working. And I also was starting to see that without challenging systemic oppression and really changing the systems of how trade and business work, that eventually we would get so integrated into the marketplace, or capitalism, I would call it, that we would lose our way. And so I was looking for how do I work more at that intersection of still sticking with small is beautiful visionary companies and movements and looking at the intersection with systemic change. And so that brought me really to the new economy movement. And as I kind of had the realization of where I wanted to be, I got recruited to apply for a job as executive director of the New Economy Coalition. And as I learned about it through the application and hiring process, I got more and more excited. It just seemed like exactly where I wanted to be. And so fortunately, I was offered the job. And by that time, I had seen a few videos, including one of board member Ed Whitfield, who gave some incredible talks at New Economy conferences and really brought in the history of capitalism, of slavery, colonialism, and essentially all the things I wanted to be including in the work I was doing. So I was thrilled when I got offered the job as executive director 2 years ago.
So it sounds like moving from the sort of direct trade to the farmer, offering higher prices, which is amazing, but also just realizing there's a lot more systemic issues going on that affect that relationship.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things fair trade has done really is create the opportunity for farmers to, or support farmers to organize cooperatively, but almost more importantly than that is to allow those co-ops and to support those co-ops to organize themselves regionally, nationally, and globally. And so creating more of a movement and being able to work on policy change and as well as movement building at all levels, from local village level all the way up to the global stage, to me was critically important. And I was seeing the entrance in coffee, at least, of all these direct traders who are doing nice work, but there's no movement building aspect to what they're doing. And so to me, just helping a specific farm or a small co-op by itself doesn't help them weather really political change that happens in a country, in a region, and doesn't really give them long-term viability. That movement building is an essential component of it. So it was an exciting shift for me. I mean, I still believe in the work of fair trade, and I'm proud of the impact that fair trade has had on the world, particularly in a few industries, but really looking beyond kind of the short-term incremental changes.
Yeah, so that dovetails nicely with some of the major initiatives that you're working on. Would you describe New Economy Coalition broadly, like what it is, and then maybe some of the main things you're working on?
Sure. New Economy Coalition is a network of, at this point, we're close to 200 organizations, other networks, movements, and we are a broad network that go across many different movements and sectors and geographies. We operate primarily in the United States, but have some key members in Canada as well. And simply put, New Economy Coalition is helping our members build collaboration, cooperation to build more grassroots power. And we do that in a variety of ways. The most kind of public way that we're known for is convening events. So every 2 years, we have a major conference. So far, they've all been in the U.S. We will have one next summer. It will be somewhere in the south of the U.S. We should have an exact location and date in the next couple of months, and that will go out to the public. We had our last big conference last year in Buffalo, New York. We had about 1,000 people attend, people that have been working their whole adult lives in new economy projects and people that were brand new to it, learning for the first time, and everybody in between. And it was an incredible few days of workshops. We had network gatherings of different networks of organizations came a day early and had the opportunity to all get together. We had extensive scholarship support to enable people that often don't get to conferences to be able to attend and share the work they're doing and learn from other people doing similar work. It was an amazing, say, 3-4 days in Buffalo. So that's the key thing. We also do convening through matchmaking. So we help people connect that might not be connected. Say if someone's doing urban land trusts in Buffalo, New York, and they don't know the folks doing similar work in Denver, we help them connect so they can collaborate and avoid reproducing the same innovations in disconnected localities. We've now advanced that into working groups. We have about a dozen working groups on everything from self-care to creating a new economy policy platform for political campaigns, all kinds of things in between, small and large. And we support them with our staff and some resources, and we support leadership coming from the members to lift those things forward. So the basic idea is that 1 + 1 can equal 3 when groups come together. The second area we work in is communications work. We have an emerging role as movement publicist for New Economy Movement. We're not the only ones doing that, but we play a key central role for that. So we have a PR program doing that. We do some trainings for our members to learn how to do print interviews, radio interviews, TV interviews. We have a fellowship for journalists so they can learn about New Economy Movement. We pay them a small stipend, and in exchange they produce pieces on New Economy. We have a narrative program where we're working with our members to build common frameworks about how they tell the story of the New Economy. are developing common language with them, and we'll have various campaigns over the coming years, starting this fall, to get the stories of new economy out there. And to support that, we've supported our communications director and some other folks to produce a project called Beautiful Solutions, which has become part of New Economy Coalition, and also the Highlander Center in Tennessee. And it will be a book that will feature the best of the new economy around the planet. And it will also give a whole framework on what is new economy. That will be supported by an open source website that different localities can use and populate with their own stories. And we will continue to add stories of our members and others doing visionary work and showing the world that it's not just a dream of creating a new economy, but these projects, large and small, are actually happening all over the place. And then finally, that will be supported by a traveling training program. So instead of just doing a conventional book tour, there'll be a popular economics curriculum developed by the Highlander Center, and that will be used to go around the country, the continent, and ultimately, funding available, the world, helping communities understand how new economy projects get launched. They get identified as to what the needs are of a community, and then to give them some practical support on here's how people have done it around the planet, and connecting them to other groups that are already doing the kinds of projects they want to do. And then the third piece of what we do, so we do the convening, the communications, and then we do what we call movement resourcing. Right now, that's primarily a regranting program. We have a committee made up of past grantees, members, staff, and board that review all applications, and we give grants up to $5,000 to give our members and newcomers better access to knowledge, wisdom, and power. So putting on events, attending trainings, attending conferences, those kinds of things. And it's really the beginning for us of deepening the conversation around how do you better resource a movement? How do you help groups that are traditionally marginalized from having access to resources get better access to resources? So that might include helping funders better understand grassroots communities, doing trainings with our members to help them better understand how to access different kinds of resources, and facilitating conversation around how do we better resource our movement. So that's a pretty good overview of the kind of three legs of our new economy stool here at New Economy Coalition.
Yeah, and I'm going to, just looking at your website, I'm going to list a few of the companies because I think it'll help folks get a sense of who are members. And this is one of the who's who list of new economy. So, Yes Magazine, The Working World, U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives, Transform Finance, South Mountain Company, Slow Money Network, Self-Help Credit Union, Resource Generation, Regenerative Finance, B Lab, Bali. So I think maybe that would also help folks to see. So it's sort of a network of networks in a way, right? Sort of like the umbrella of a network like Bali or something. Yeah.
Yes, and our members are split between other networks and individual organizations. So there's a pretty wide range of folks, and that's some would say that's a challenge, but we see it as the strength of what we're doing is that we're able to bridge across different movements, sectors, and geographies, and kind of skate above sometimes the small infighting by building broad collaboration.
So, what are the top 2 to 3 challenges that you see, or that you see in building a new economy? Is it that these groups are too disparate to really sit down and talk to each other? Is there too many shiny objects and people are all in their individual silos? Like, what are some of the big challenges that you see as actually creating that new economy you want to see?
Well, I think I start with just the story of what's possible. So I think in the United States, individualism and the kind of lift by bootstrap mythologies are so powerful that building collaboration, building community wealth, it's hard to get attention beyond kind of left media on the stories of what actually is happening, what's working, and also just to build excitement amongst people in the US and Canada that these, what are seen as alternatives, that these people, community, planet-based solutions to human challenges are actually feasible, viable, and in fact, there's lots of examples of how they're working around the planet. So I think a lot of it just starts with believability and shifting the narrative, the story out there about what's possible. I think that's the biggest challenge. The next challenge for us is that I think historically progressive forces, folks on the left, have been fairly fragmented in the last, say, 50, 60 years. as identity-based politics got stronger, that was a really powerful evolutionary step, but it also added to more fragmentation. And so we've seen on the right where there's been much more solidarity and ability to build long-term programs, we have been somewhat isolated and splintered. And so that's why we're looking at this attempt to have broader collaboration across movements, across sectors, where people meet on broad value connection and sometimes just specific opportunities around specific projects. So it's building that more cohesion and having more of a voice so that we can enroll people beyond just people that already understand what we're talking about and are already involved in what we're doing. And that expands to even when we talk about cooperatives, people say, well, it's not really practical. And then pointing out things like 40 million people in the U.S. get their electricity from rural electric co-ops. That's not a widely known fact. And in fact, most people that get their electricity that way don't really know what a co-op is or that they're part of a cooperative. So I think some basic education is needed. And again, we see working across movements, across sectors as a really effective way to do that, to join together and to have enough of a voice and enough power to reach beyond the already committed.
Is there a particular movement or initiative that either New Economy Coalition is working on or that you're seeing amongst your members or maybe in the economy, but that you're most excited about, like you think has a ton of legs right now and is really exciting for you?
Well, I think Beautiful Solutions that I mentioned before, the book web platform and training program, I think has unlimited potential. It's been a hugely ambitious project of a small group of people putting all of this together. And I see that as having incredible possibilities for us at New Economy Coalition and with our co-supporter, the Highlander Center in Tennessee, to really bring a lot more people into the New Economy movement, just by educating them on basic ideas of what is New Economy, what are cooperatives, how do new economics actually work. So I would say that's one I'm very excited about. I'm excited about on our level, organizational level, next summer, we'll be having another conference. Our conference last year pushed all of us on the staff to the max and just making it happen in a very collaborative and democratic way. But it just brought together a lot of people, really built momentum for the movement. And I think most people that were there left with really feeling part of something bigger than their own organization. And that's what a movement is. So that was also super exciting and will be exciting coming up. I think in terms of things that our members are working on, it's incredible. I feel really blessed to have this role and to be at this kind of nexus of all these incredible innovations. So I'm hugely inspired. I don't want to diminish things that happened this weekend in Virginia or other challenges we have as a country and as a species. But this is our moment for the New Economy movement. There's so much innovation and creativity that's blossoming all over the planet, in this case, particularly in the US and Canada. And having the opportunity to learn about all those movements and projects that are happening and to be able to support them and figure out how to build collaboration, it's an incredible moment to be part of this movement.
How do you get your head around something like what recently happened in Virginia with the, for folks who don't know, the neo-Nazi march, et cetera, white sort of nationalism and, major injuries and deaths? How do you wrap your head around what seems to be going on and then also what you're alluding to, which is the sort of seeds of a new economy? Are you optimistic or pessimistic, or I'm kind of curious about that balance?
Well, I'm really dismayed by the amount of suffering, violence, and rage that is coming out of some very misguided ideas about who's gotten a break in this country and how power works in the United States and has always worked in the United States. So for me, it is very dismaying and troubling. And I think at New Economy Coalition, some of us are fond of quoting Adrienne Marie Brown, a brilliant writer and thinker who has talked about things aren't getting worse, just more truth is being revealed at this point. And so we see it, as many of us, as kind of the last gasp of U.S. individualism. And we call it white supremacy, call it what you will. This country was founded with some incredible ideas and some horrific truths that were brushed over, and we haven't fully come to terms with I would call it those horrific wounds of slavery, native extermination, and treatment of people that are different than ourselves as other. We have many proud traditions of people treating others beautifully as well. And so our work is to not ignore the terrible things that are happening, but to be able to focus on the beautiful things that are blossoming and coming together and lift them up and enroll more people in what's possible if we go with love, hope, community instead of fear and hate. I think we all have choices to make in everything that we do, and so we focus on those positive things and support people to fight back when they need to fight back.
I like that. So you're holding, not ignoring, and just sort of sticking your head in the sand and being everything's positive, but holding that while also not letting it sort of make you unable to do anything. So much pain and suffering that you can't move forward and build this new economy. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's what you're hearing. I believe a lot of social change is healing work, and we have to do our individual healing, our healing in our families and our communities, in the states, and as a country. And I think there's always been people since before this country was founded that have been working in that direction, and there have always been other people working around greed, accumulation, extraction, and treating the earth as a bank account that we can endlessly withdraw from. So I think we all have our choices. We work more on the healing and building side, and we do the resistance we need to do to keep ourselves and our communities as safe as possible.
And what, since, it's related to the election of Trump, but since Trump has been elected, have you sensed what are the silver linings of the election of Trump in your work? Maybe that's my question for you.
Well, like I was saying before, in a way, this is our moment. We've seen an incredible uptick in the number of people that are marching in the street, that are interested in cooperatives and state banking and renewable energy. So on the one hand, the media is just in a 24/7 news cycle of covering the latest outrageous behavior by our chief executive and cronies. But on the other hand, even though it's not getting so much media coverage, the outpouring of interest in building the positive and not building things based on hate and oppression is incredible. So that's the silver lining. I can say even family members that have never demonstrated before or never been engaged in activism have been on the streets, have been involved in political organizing in neighborhoods. So to me, that's where the hope is that people are getting energized. I wish it didn't take this kind of fear and horrific behavior to energize so many people, but that is the positive side of it.
Yeah, it's the sort of it's the horrific downside that motivates the upside potentially. I wish humans were a little more motivated by reason, but I feel like it's a very deep emotional reaction.
Yes,
to things
sure.
Yeah,
and that's part of why we put a lot of our energy in learning how to better help our members change the story and to tell more compelling stories about what they're doing, because we learn over and over pummeling people with facts is still pummeling people. It's not that effective. But learning how to tell better stories that give deep truth about what we're doing and the values behind it is compelling, does work, and that's where a lot of our focus is.
Can you give an example of that? I like that idea of changing a narrative. Can you give an example on a particular issue or something that you've helped or you think is doing a good job of changing the narrative?
Wow, that's good. That's a challenging question. Well, right now we have not launched specific campaigns ourselves so much, but we are just getting off the ground. In a sense, you can say the first campaign of this new narrative work. And so we have a campaign, hashtag Now We Own It. And so we are putting that out to the world using mostly social media, and we are getting our members and anybody to share stories about that concept of now we own something. So it's encouraging people to put out stories about how maybe community ownership of something has shifted, new worker ownership, new employee ownership, new nonprofit ownership, land trusts, to just share and put out to the world what are all the ways that now we own things. So that's a simple example of not necessarily putting out long-winded stories about all the statistics about number of Democratic worker-owned companies and jobs and employee stock ownership programs, and just putting out lots of data and facts, but putting out the stories. So we'll take that and curate it. There might be some videos made. There'll be different ways to share those stories, but it'll just be people telling their own stories.
Yeah, I love
all about shifting ownership.
I love that. And you worked in a worker-owned cooperative. You helped found Equal Exchange, one of the most famous and successful worker-owned cooperatives. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on specifically around worker ownership? Some folks have argued, well, if you have someone like at Patagonia, you have Yvon Chouinard him and his wife own 100% of Patagonia, and they're just really great leaders who run a great company. And then other folks have said, well, worker ownership is the right way. I'm curious, like, what is the argument to someone who's maybe thinking, I'm just a great CEO, or I just run a great company and I do really well for my employees. Why should I share ownership? Do you have any thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the statistics in my head about employee-owned companies, and particularly democratically owned companies. People tend to have their jobs longer. There's less turnover. They tend to earn higher wages. There are many positive statistics about how employee ownership creates healthier communities. I think it's important to kind of preface all of this about ownership and say, for me, it's a tool. It's not the answer. And I think when we get into a specific movement, like maybe employee ownership movement or the fair trade movement or the economy movement, sometimes we tend to latch on to tools and they become kind of an answer, which is the way we're trained by the marketplace. Like when you have something that's exciting, then you just pound that nail and everything looks like a nail. So I think worker ownership is really powerful. And I think it's an important part of building an economy that's accountable to human beings and to communities, and that has a reverence for putting the earth back in the middle and taking out money and accumulation. So I think when we have extreme private ownership, yes, Patagonia, they can do a lot of exciting things, certainly that publicly owned companies often can't do because they're beholden to different measures of success. So private companies often are more innovative than publicly owned companies. But there is really no accountability of a Patagonia. The accountability is Yvon Chouinard and his wife's conscience. And, that's pretty cool. I love Patagonia, given what it is, and use a lot of their products myself. But I don't think it offers the same empowerment of employees having control of their workplace and having some control of their own day-to-day work in a way that ownership gives you that pride, that control, the accountability, and the courage often to speak up and to create more innovation. So I think also there's a bit of a tension often in cooperatives. The cooperatives themselves sometimes tend to be somewhat conservative in terms of taking risk, because groups tend to actually not take as much risk as to be as crazy as individual entrepreneurs or owners or innovators. But the other side is that people have more job security, more stability, more pride and empowerment, and that often leads to having the courage to take more risk and to create more innovation. So I think both those are true in ownership.
And what about leadership advice? You've been in leadership roles at several organizations, had your own consulting practice. Have you found, is there a particular piece of leadership advice for some of the listeners who are interested in maybe starting their own company, or maybe they're existing entrepreneurs? What's the best piece of leadership advice you've received?
I'm not sure I have the best, but I would say for me, one of the most important pieces of advice is commit to being a lifelong learner. That we're all always needing to learn, and I would say we're also all always needing to unlearn. And so particularly people in leadership roles often have some experience with having been in other leadership roles and might have easier access due to their class background or their race, gender, sexual orientation. There are a variety of ways that people get into leadership positions, and people across all identity groups, of course, are in leadership positions. But I would say for all of us, really, who live in the United States, Canada, really anywhere in the world, there's a lot of unlearning to do of how racism has impacted us, either directly through oppression or internalized oppression or through privilege, different ways. So I think being committed to that lifelong learning and unlearning is a key part to being a better leader. I think the other thing for me is I always come back to my commitment to lift up the people I work with and to support their leadership. And that's really the core part of my job, is not to be a savior or a saint per se, but to keep looking at how not to make my brand the famous brand, but to lift up all of those I work with.
You mentioned unlearning around, and also learning around things like racism and oppression. As a bit of a personal question, but as a white male, what have you learned about racism and anti-oppression maybe in the last few years that you didn't know on a deep level that's really stuck out to you?
What have I learned that I didn't know? Well, I think the thing that I keep learning over and over and over is that as a straight, white, cis male who grew up in a middle-class family, the fear of being the oppressor, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being foolish, of saying the wrong thing is the biggest obstacle to liberation for me. And I feel like I keep learning that over and over. So I would say that's probably the thing that keeps coming back for me. I think the other thing I learned that was really hard lesson for me was when we had our conference last year in Buffalo, and it was a particular tough time. There have been several unarmed Black men murdered, police officers murdered. There was a lot of grief and rage in the room at our conference. And it was really hard for me to find my authentic voice, feeling like, hey, this is my space, this is my time. And I think I learned with support from my coworkers that leadership requires us to step up regardless of the difficulty of the moment and to always stay as much as possible in our authentic self and to show up, and that we all have a role to play in building the new economy, regardless of where we come from. So I think that was a challenging lesson, to just step up and own my power and my role and be my authentic self.
Yeah, thank you for being vulnerable. It's I think even speaking about it is helpful, because I definitely know the feeling of caring about an issue but feeling too scared, or like you said, not wanting to say the wrong thing. So then if too many white people feel that way about just, I don't want to rock any boats, I'll keep quiet even if I'm intellectually very angry about the situation. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, the learning and unlearning is not just about those perhaps what are seen as softer issues, but just also traditional leadership and skill. We're all constantly having to learn. Technology changes, and as human beings, there's just always new things to learn from. And so I think that commitment to always learning and being able to acknowledge what we don't know when we do make mistakes is part of also the unlearning of how, I would say probably all of us, certainly the vast majority of us, have been socialized our whole life to grab power, to try and hide mistakes, hide our faults, and so often act out of fear. And I think it goes not just with difficult issues such as dealing with race and class and gender and sexual orientation, but it also goes with how do you lead? What is leadership? How do you manage? How do you build organizations? How do you build effective systems?
It seems to me that one of the main challenges is that people actually underestimate their own power, because the New Economy Coalition is not a inherently intelligent organization, and the organizations you represent are made up of individual people. And I still think that one of the big leaps is really that all you're really trying to do is convince one person to make a change. You're not trying to, it's like, I think that's a big disconnect for a lot of people, is this sort of, there's so much work to be done, but it's still at a person by person. It still happens. Change happens individual at a time. So I think it just stood out to me as you're talking about the fear of speaking up. I think a lot of people underestimate their own ability to actually change things by speaking up.
Indeed. And I think a lot of us know how to speak up in a kind of David and Goliath, that we're the small, somewhat helpless victim, even at times, fighting the evil giant. And I think part of our emphasis on cooperation and collaboration is part of the journey of acknowledging our own power, but it's also building our own power. Sometimes we have very little power as organizations, so we do have to look at how do we really build power. And I think ultimately that's got to be a key component along with our individual transformation. We need to build power and do it perhaps in some new ways where it's not power over, but it's the power to create change and to build institutions. And I think that's the moment we're at, is is really looking at how do we get beyond small experiments and really look at institution building at a much broader scale. And that is challenging. A lot of us are used to working in very small organizations, and we need millions of those organizations, and we need some organizations at scale.
In regards to learning, what is the book you most often give as a gift?
I think that that changes over time. I think the thing that's lasted the longest, there's a couple of books. Seeing Systems by Barry Oshry. It's just about how do people understand their roles in organizations and how do organizations work. I've given a few copies in the last 2 years of a book by Desmond Tutu and his daughter about forgiveness. And then I've always focused my whole life actually on fiction. So that's where a lot of my learning comes from. I mean, I like to read nonfiction to learn specific things, but what feeds my soul historically has always been fiction.
Is there a particular book that you're thinking of, or it doesn't have to be your favorite of all time, but just what's an example of some fiction?
Well, last month I went to a book reading. My mind's drawing a blank right now. I don't know. It really comes and goes, I would say, over time. But Arundhati Roy, who wrote an incredible novel 20 years ago called The God of Small Things, she just came out with a new book, and I saw her do a reading from that book, and it was incredible. Her ability to weave together her personal story, political story, really kind of, I would say, a spiritual approach to being human is just outstanding.
I thought you were going to go for like Tom Clancy, like military fiction. That would be.
No, I like to read a lot of international fiction. Yeah. I would say, yeah.
Cutting for Stone, etc.
I love Cutting for Stone. Yeah.
How did I know you would?
I think, Arundhati Roy's new book's called The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. That's what I was blanking on.
Got it. Well, maybe in the last few questions here, who else is inspiring you? What other thought leaders, individuals, or organizations do you look to really say, like that person or organization is really on the leading edge of where I think the new economy should be heading?
Wow, there's a lot of people. It would be hard to point out one person. So the risk of exclusion. I mean, the person I'll start with is when I was in the process of applying for the job of executive director and trying to learn more about New Economy Coalition, I happened on a video by board member Ed Whitfield, who is co-director of the Fund for Democratic Communities in North Carolina. And Ed is an incredible musician. He has an incredible sense of humor, and his ability to weave stories about where we've been, where we are, and where we need to go is really incredible. So I would say Ed is definitely one of the people that inspires me. Gar Alperovitz is another former board member of New Economy Coalition, author, and just kind of New Economy visionary, and a beautiful man. I had the good fortune last month to spend a short couple of days at the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which has been around for 85 years. They've done a lot of the training of grassroots movement leaders, starting with organized labor in the 30s of the last century, up through Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and Black Lives Matter folks. They are an incredible institution. So the Highlander Center, I've worked most closely with a woman there who, Andrea Williams, is also just a brilliant activist. So those are a couple of folks that are sticking out, but there are many people across the country. The great fortune I have of this work is meeting so many incredible people. I would also say just the people I get to work with every day. I work with 11 other people on staff at New Economy Coalition, and they are spread out around the U.S., and incredible organizers, writers, innovators. So I kind of am in awe of all of them are significantly younger than myself, and pretty much all of them are better writers than I am, better organizers. So that gives me a lot of inspiration, is just learning from my coworkers.
What about, how can listeners support your work? Is there any initiatives or events or et cetera where people can support you in furthering the new economy?
Well, of course, we're always looking for people to support what we do in in however they're moved. So get involved in new economy work, whether that's local cooperatives, a local first movement, community banking, participatory budgeting, renewable power. Get involved in building community wealth. People want more ideas. Neweconomy.net is our website. You can see a list of all our members. You can find out more about what we're doing. I recommend reading our 2016 annual report. It's a great overview of what we were doing last year and just what we're up to. And it's really nicely done. People can, of course, go to our website and donate. We're always appreciative of that. Also on our website, you can sign up for a newsletter. Every 2 weeks, our communications and programs membership folks put out a brilliant newsletter called the New Economy Roundup. And that's a great way to quickly get educated about what's happening. And I guarantee pretty much anybody that starts reading that will be blown away by how much stuff is going on all over the country, in rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas, and some of the things happening in Canada as well, which we report a little less on, are really inspiring, and particularly in Quebec, they've taken things to a whole other level that we don't get to very often here in the U.S. So that's why I would recommend sign up for the newsletter and get involved. Find where your passion connects and get involved in something in your community that's building a better future.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate you being on, and look forward to following. I already signed up for your newsletter while we were talking. So,
awesome.
Thanks. And I encourage the listeners to do the same, neweconomy.net. And thanks again for joining us.
Yeah. And @NewEconomics is our Twitter handle.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.